Why do we say stories of holy men who passed away a long time ago? I'm going to give you a philosophical answer, a more scholarly answer than I need to, and then perhaps you're even asking for. Because I think I want to explore this on what I think is a basic or a fundamental level. What I'm about to tell you, I believe, is true not just in hergish, in myth and Hasidic feeling, but in terms of creation and the divine plan. When we talk about the purpose of creation, why did God create the world? Why did God create man? What does God want from man? Of course, there's so much discussion in so many different madreges, so many different dimensions of Torah Sheba'al Peh about how that question is answered. But what emerges, at least in the Hasidic model, is basically two ideas. There's a broad idea and there's a narrow idea. The broad idea is about bringing God down. The narrow idea is about raising us up to God. And this applies in many, many contexts. Most basically, did God create the world for the Jewish people, for the land of Israel, and for the Torah? Or did He create the world for all of humanity, the entire globe, and the 7 laws of Noach? And the answer to that question is both. Based on your angle, if you're approaching the purpose of creation from what's considered a narrow perspective, the answer is He created for the Jewish people, for Eretz Yisrael, and for Torah, which is why you have in Rishonim, very famously in the Ramban, based on Midrashim, but the Ramban, of course, drives this point home, that Yiddishkeit was really designed for Eretz Yisrael. It's not only that there are many mitzvahs that we cannot do outside of Eretz Yisrael, but even the mitzvahs that we can do outside of Eretz Yisrael, like tefillin, the way he expresses it is we're practicing it in Chutz La'aretz, so that when we come to Eretz Yisrael, we're able to practice all of the mitzvahs. Which of course is the basis for an argument made in Sfarim, that if you're afraid that you cannot keep Torah mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael, especially this year, Tavshin Pei Beis, which is the Shnasa Shemitah, even though Shemitah B'zman Hazeh is the Rabbanon, but it's still a mitzvah, so the Chazal say, better don't go to Eretz Yisrael than go to the Holy Land and fail. That's one angle. The other angle is that Hashem created the world for the entire globe, for all of humanity, and for the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Neach. The first model is the narrow model. It's about raising ourselves above the world. So there's the holiest people, the holiest land, the holiest way of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But in terms of the broad purpose, which is bringing God Almighty down, it's the other way around. It's the lower a person is, the more they serve that purpose, even though they're doing so much less than a greater person, because for them it's more difficult, for them it's a bigger deal, and accordingly they are more central in fulfilling the purpose for which Hashem created the world. And when you'll then ask the question, so which is the point and the purpose? The narrow or the broad? So let's be candid. We're Lubavitcher Hasidim, we're Chabad, in Deir Hashvi, in the 7th generation, and everybody knows that in our times, there's no question about it, that the purpose of creation is Nisav HaKadosh Baruch Hu Liyas Le'edira B'tachtonim, to bring God into the world. In other words, the broad purpose that involves all of humanity, the whole globe, and the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Neach, rather than the Jewish people, the Holy Land, and the 613 mitzvahs. The Rebbe seems to hold that the Rambam agrees with this, and that the Alter Rebbe agrees with this. The Rambam is the Likutei Sichas Chelik Chav Gimel, Pashas Bolak, the Sicha that's called V'Karkar. The Rebbe makes this argument. Now, of course, if you ask me, so who's right? Is the narrow about raising up idea, or the broad about bringing down idea true? Which is truer? And it depends which Maimah you learn, depends which Sicha you learn. I guess most of you who are listening to me, if you're Chabad persuaded, you're disposed towards Dira B'tachtonim. If you're not Chabad persuaded, this idea frightens you a little bit, then you're far more disposed towards the other side. When you ask the question, as they say, unbalanced, the answer is it's the combination. It's the combination of a special land, a special people, and a special Torah juxtaposed against the whole of the world, all of mankind, and all of the Torah, because they need each other. They feed off each other. In other words, the idea of being holy sets the stage for the idea of being a person who serves God and lives in the image of God in the real world. And the ultimate expression of holiness is not when the holiness is isolated, but when the holiness is manifest and is brought down and is lived in the real world, in every day, in every moment, in every environment, in every situation, in every circumstance, in every aspect and facet of life. And there are many models for this dichotomy, for this plurality, for this paradox. Perhaps the first model would be Avraham Avinu and the Jewish people. Avraham Avinu, Yitzchak Avinu, Yaakov Avinu, Sarah Imenu, Rivka Imenu, Rachel, Leah, were individual righteous people. They're the fathers of our nation. They're the parents of our nation. Without them, the Jewish nation wouldn't be born. But we learn about in Chassidus that their influence, their legacy had to be erased in Mitzrayim for the birth of a nation. And a nation, which is called in Hebrew Am, is also called Tzibur, which means a community that consists not only of Tzadikim, not only of Beinani, but also of Rishoyim. And today happens to be out of Yom Kippur, so I want to throw in that it says in Halacha that we say, Kol Nidrei, Onu Maspilel, Onu Matirim Lispalel Him Avaryonim, we're giving ourselves permission as a quorum, as a minyan, as a Eda of Dayonim. Onu Matirim Lispalel Im Havaryonim, we're permitting ourselves to pray with sinners. So it says in Halacha, it's not only that we're allowed to pray with sinners, we have to have sinners. A community that's only righteous is not a community. It's only a community if you have above average, average, and below average. And together, they constitute the nation of God. So if you would ask me the question, so what's the point of creation? Avraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Rachel, Leah, or the collective of the Jewish people? The answer is it's the interface, it's the combination. The Tzadik is very, very important. And the purpose of the Tzadik has to do with the entire community. And this is the answer to your question. Why do we tell stories of Tzadikim? It's not only because Tzadikim are closer to God, it's not only because Tzadikim and their stories are very inspiring. It's because in a real way, Tzadikim are planted by God with great precision and with a very distinctive purpose. There is a legitimate perspective within Torah to say, and I think you'll hear this a lot in Braslav and Chassidus, that the world is for the Tzadikim. And all the people serve the Tzadik or help the Tzadik achieve his end. And the more the plurality, the people are close to the Tzadik and help the Tzadik achieving his end, the better those people are off. But it is almost as if the entire world was created for the one righteous person. And there's legitimacy to this. In other words, this is not just an emotional argument and a Hasidic Fabrengen-like argument, it's a Torah argument. Tzadikim are clear. Tzadikim don't have the confusion and the entanglements that we have. And they're held to an incredibly high standard. And there is an angle in the mind of the Tzadik that his personal service it has to be perfect, it has to be very, very exact, because this is why God created the world, for the Tzadik. And the Tzadik appreciates obviously his responsibility towards the people around themselves, but also the fact that the people around themselves help him achieve what he as the individual Tzaddik needs to achieve. To say this in a more Chabad philosophical form, the Tzaddik has the vision. Or to say it even more profoundly and more controversially, the Tzaddik chooses the vision. The Tzaddik has the free will to actually choose what path he is going to take in his life, in the time and place that he lives. And he has more than one option. And he's going to take the entire generation in the direction that he chooses, whether it's a direction which is going towards more isolationism and raising themselves up, or towards plurality and bringing God into the world. This is literally a choice that the Tzaddik makes. The Tzaddik has that authority, the Tzaddik has that power, and the Tzaddik creates the path that everybody follows. So the centrality of a Tzaddik, a real Tzaddik, and we don't know, a Tzaddik doesn't mean a great scholar. A Tzaddik is a great scholar also. A Tzaddik means a person who has an intimacy with God. At the very least, Ruach HaKodesh, a Spirit of God rests upon him. At the very most, there's actually a prophetic sense upon him, Batial Ruach Havaya. And the prerequisites to that Ruach HaKodesh, to the prerequisites to that sense of the Divine Spirit, is a purifying of his body and his mind and his actions to a degree which is perfect or virtually perfect, that brings him into the sphere of experiencing divinity and makes him into what we call not just a pure person, but a holy person, Kveit Kedushas, a holy person. That individual is placed in this world logistically, meaning not everybody could be that. The Rambam writes, Taka, that in free will there's no limits. Any person can choose to be as great a tzaddik as Moshe Rabbeinu, as great as Rosh, as Bilam, Harasha, etc. And of course, this Rambam is a tzaddik chiyun, it needs to be analyzed, but that's what the Rambam writes explicitly. But in Tanya we learn that although a person can escape his caste, can transcend the design of his soul that God gave him, which defines what kind of person he can be, Tzaddikim are special. They were created special, and they have an incredible amount of work to actualize that specialness. And if and when they do, and they achieve this station of being inspired and closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they become very central to the purpose, both in terms of leading us, and from one angle, the world was created for the Tzadik. Everything is about the Tzadik. And the people around the Tzadik have the good fortune, have the opportunity to fulfill their purpose in this world by helping the Tzadik fulfill his. We tell stories of tzaddikim in part because the entire purpose of creation revolves around the tzaddik. This is one angle. Now, I will be honest with you and tell you that many Chabad Hasidim, especially from earlier generations, would have a huge issue with what I just said, and I'm officially a Chabadnik, because in Chabad Hasidus there is always the idea of a tzaddik b'manasa yichya. Tanya chapter 33 does not go on the tzaddik, but it goes on each one. In other words, one of the big differences between Chabad and other Hasidus is the place of the tzaddik in the hierarchy of the Hasidic movement, where in other movements the centrality of the tzaddik is not only very important, but it's everything. He gives life to his community, gives purpose to his community. And in Chabad there was this priority of avodah b'koyach atzmai. But even within Chassidus Chabad there is this place, or to say it differently, Hashem, there's an angle, and there's other angles, but there is an angle where Hashem created the world for the tzaddik, and the community's fulfillment of its purpose depends on helping the tzaddik fulfill his. And in Chabad there is an attitude that you need to take initiative. You need to use your own free will, you have to exercise your own judgment, you have to put in your own work to help the tzaddik achieve his end. So the stories we're telling about tzaddikim are not only inspiring, they're giving us a sense of the purpose of the creation and our role within it. And practically this means that the idea of hiskashrus, being attached to a tzaddik, which is so incredibly basic to Chassidus, isn't only about inspiration. It isn't only about lifting ourselves up. It isn't only giving us the strength to deal with the challenges that come from doubt and from depression and from a lack of motivation. But it really speaks to the truth of why God created the relationship between the tzaddik and the common person. Now, just to repeat one more time, the stories that we're telling the tzaddik in the model that I just articulated are helping us appreciate how important it is to be attached to the tzaddik, which is deeper than how the tzaddik inspires us or how the tzaddik helps us deal with the struggles of our lives. Now I know, and I will concede, that what I just said was not what you expected to hear, or certainly not what is typically articulated. So I'm going to end this session, which is too long already, and Blineda, next week I'm going to do another segment on this question where I'll give the more traditional, the more classic, the more typical answer. But what I shared today is, I think, the more precise, scholarly answer. A chasima and a gemar chasima tova to all of us. Tova nirav nigla. As I mentioned in earlier classes, this year is both a Shnas HaIbur and a Shnas Shabbos. It's a Shemitah year, which is a year of Shabbos. It's a leap year. So the leap year represents tshuva. The Shemitah year represents Shabbos. So there's the tshuva of Shabbos. Like this entire year is a Shabbos tshuva kind of a year. And of course the theme of Shabbos Tshuva is Tshuva Allah, the higher Tshuva, which is done with joy, predicated on the attitude of let's get as close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as we can and get joy from that relationship. A guten Yom Tov, a guten Yom Kippurim, and a guten Yom HaKodesh.